The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Silver Spoon, one of Boston's most prestigious restaurants. The warm light caught the crystal glasses and polished silverware, creating tiny rainbows across the crisp white tablecloths. For Jade Thompson, it was just another busy Friday at work, though she couldn't help but notice how her feet already ached in the simple black flats she wore. Still 4 hours to go on her shift. Table 12 needs their order taken, called out her coworker Ming, rushing past with a tray of appetizers. Jade nodded, quickly checking her appearance in the reflection of a decorative mirror. She adjusted her neat black apron and made sure her braids were still perfectly secured in their bun. Even after 2 years of working here to support her medical school dreams, she still felt the pressure to look extra professional. As she approached table 12, Jade immediately noticed the designer handbag carefully placed on the spare chair and the way the woman sat with perfect posture, as if she just stepped out of a country club magazine. Patricia Wellington was sharing lunch with two other women who looked equally expensive in their pearls and tailored outfits. "Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to the Silver Spoon. I'm Jade, and I'll be taking care of you today," she said with her warmest smile, the one that usually earned her excellent tips. "May I start you off with our wine list?" Patricia barely glanced up from her menu, her voice carrying that particular tone that Jade had learned to recognize, the one that suggested she viewed service staff as barely visible. "We'll have the Rothschild Cabernet, the 2015, not the 2016, and make sure it's properly decanted." Jade wrote down the order, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Excellent choice. I'll have that right out for you. Would you like to hear about our specials while the wine is being prepared?" One of Patricia's companions actually looked at Jade and smiled, but Patricia cut in before Jade could continue. "That won't be necessary. We'll have the tuna tartare to start, and do try to ensure it's fresh this time. Last month's was questionable." Throughout the meal, Jade provided impeccable service, anticipating their needs before they arose. She made sure their water glasses never dipped below half full, replaced their bread basket without being asked, and timed each course perfectly. Yet with each interaction, Patricia found something to critique: the temperature of the soup, the placement of the forks, the timing between courses. "I suppose standards really aren't what they used to be," Patricia commented loudly to her friends as Jade cleared their dessert plates. The other women looked uncomfortable, but no one contradicted her. When it came time to settle the bill, Patricia examined every line item with scrutinizing eyes. The $400 lunch had been executed flawlessly, yet Patricia's mouth twisted into a slight frown. She pulled out her premium credit card and slipped it into the leather folder without adding any tip on the line. "Come along, ladies," Patricia announced, standing and gathering her designer bag. "We'll be late for our charity board meeting." She led her friends toward the exit, not sparing Jade another glance. Jade stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath. She'd learned long ago not to let these moments shake her confidence, but it still stung. Ming appeared at her side, having witnessed the whole thing. "Their loss," Ming whispered supportively. "Did you see how uncomfortable her friends looked? They knew she was being awful." Jade managed a small smile. "Thanks, Ming. It's fine. I've got bigger things to focus on, like that microbiology exam next week." She squared her shoulders and moved to clean the table, reminding herself that each shift brought her closer to her goals. What Jade couldn't have known, as she efficiently cleared away the expensive wine glasses and reorganized the table setting, was that this wouldn't be her last interaction with Patricia Wellington. Life had a funny way of bringing people back together, and their paths were destined to cross again, in a way that would leave them both forever changed. 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, Boston Logan International Airport buzzed with its usual chaos. Among the crowd stood Patricia Wellington, impatiently checking her designer watch every few minutes. Her son Michael was finally coming home after 2 long years of working on architectural projects across Asia, and she'd insisted on picking him up herself, despite her husband offering to send their driver. The arrival board showed his flight had landed 20 minutes ago. Patricia's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone case as she waited, her mind already running through the welcome home dinner she'd planned for tomorrow evening. The family chef had been instructed to prepare all of Michael's childhood favorites. "Mom." A familiar voice called out above the crowd noise. Patricia's face lit up as she spotted her son, his tall frame easy to spot even in the busy terminal. He looked different, more tanned, his dark hair slightly longer than she preferred, but his smile was exactly as she remembered. "Darling." Patricia reached up to hug him, careful not to wrinkle either of their clothes. You certainly look like you've been living in Asia." She reached up to touch his hair meaningfully. Michael laughed, used of his mother's particular way of showing concern. "The hair grows back, Mom. But I have so much to tell you. The projects in Singapore were incredible. But that's not even the best part of what's happened while I was away." They began walking toward the parking garage, Michael easily rolling his expensive luggage while Patricia filled him in on all the family news he'd missed. His cousin's wedding, his father's new business venture, the drama at the country club when someone wore white to another member's wedding. "But enough about all that," Patricia said as they reached her luxury car. "You mentioned there was something else. Please tell me you're finally ready to join your father's firm. The position of creative director is still open, and the board would be thrilled to have you." Michael helped load his bags into the trunk, then settled into the passenger seat. "Actually, Mom, it's about someone I met. Someone special." His face took on a softness Patricia had never seen before. "Her name is Jade, and she's incredible. She's in her final year of medical school here in Boston." Patricia's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Medical school. Well, that's different from your usual type. How did you meet someone in Boston while you were in Asia?" "We met at a medical conference in Chicago 6 months ago. I was there presenting designs for a new children's hospital, and she was attending as a student delegate. Mom, she's brilliant. She's going to be a pediatric surgeon. We've been doing long distance, but now that I'm back—" He paused, looking both excited and nervous. "I want you to meet her. I've invited her to dinner tomorrow night." Patricia nearly missed a turn, her mind racing. This wasn't part of her plan. She'd always imagined Michael with someone from their social circle, someone whose family they'd known for generations. Tomorrow? "But darling, I've already planned an intimate family dinner. Just us, like old times." "That's perfect then," Michael said, not picking up on his mother's tension. "What better way to welcome Jade into the family? And before you start worrying, yes, she knows which fork to use for the salad." He chuckled, remembering all the etiquette lessons his mother had insisted on during his childhood. Patricia forced a smile, her mind already working on how to evaluate this unexpected development. "Of course, darling. We'll make her feel welcome." She turned onto their tree-lined street, the gates of their estate opening automatically. "What did you say her last name was?" "Thompson. Jade Thompson." Michael was too busy texting someone, presumably Jade, to notice how his mother's perfectly made-up face went slightly pale, or how her fingers gripped the steering wheel just a little tighter. What Michael couldn't know was that his mother was frantically trying to remember if the waitress she'd stiffed on the tip 2 weeks ago had been wearing a name tag. Surely Boston was big enough that this had to be a different Jade Thompson. It had to be. The Wellington mansion glowed warmly in the early evening light, its perfectly manicured gardens setting the stage for what was about to become one of the most uncomfortable dinners in the family's history. Inside, Patricia paced the formal dining room, adjusting and readjusting the already perfect place settings while their housekeeper watched with growing concern. "Mrs. Wellington, you've moved that fork 3 times now," the housekeeper said gently. "Everything looks beautiful, as always." Patricia barely heard her, too consumed with anxiety. She'd spent the entire day trying to convince herself that her son's Jade Thompson couldn't possibly be the same person as the waitress from the Silver Spoon. After all, How many medical students actually needed to work as servers? The doorbell chimed precisely at 7. Patricia heard Michael's quick footsteps in the hall. He'd insisted on answering the door himself, breaking their usual protocol. She smoothed her silk dress and took a deep breath, plastering on her best society smile. "Mom. Dad." Michael's voice carried from the entrance hall. "Come meet Jade." Patricia rounded the corner into the foyer, her husband Richard close behind. The moment stretched like pulled taffy as her eyes met those of the young woman standing beside her son. The same young woman who had served her table 2 weeks ago. The same one she treated with such casual disdain. Jade stood there in a tasteful navy blue dress, holding a bottle of wine. Their eyes locked, and Patricia saw the flash of recognition, followed by something else, determination. But Jade's smile never wavered. "Mr. and Mrs. Wellington," Jade said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you so much for having me over. Michael has told me so much about you both." Richard stepped forward first, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between his wife and their guest. "Welcome, welcome. Michael hasn't stopped talking about you since he got home. Please come in." Patricia felt frozen in place, her usual social graces deserting her. Michael was looking at her expectantly, his face glowing with happiness. She forced herself to step forward and take Jade's hand, noting absently that the girl's handshake was perfect, firm but not aggressive. "How lovely to meet you," Patricia managed, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Shall we move to the sitting room for drinks before dinner?" As they walked through the house, Patricia watched as Jade took in the original artwork, the antique furnishings, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. There was no sign of the server's careful professionalism from 2 weeks ago. Instead, Jade carried herself with natural confidence and grace. "Your home is beautiful," Jade commented, settling onto the leather sofa next to Michael. "These paintings are incredible. Are they all originals?" Richard launched into his favorite topic, their art collection, while Patricia busied herself with the drinks cart, grateful for something to do with her hands. She could feel Jade's eyes on her back as she poured the wine with slightly shaking fingers. "Mom's quite the art collector," Michael said proudly. "She serves on the board of the Museum of Fine Arts." "How wonderful," Jade replied, her voice carrying just the slightest edge that only Patricia would recognize. "I love the MFA. I often study there between classes and my shifts at the restaurant." Patricia nearly dropped the crystal wine glass she was holding. Michael looked at Jade with interest. "You work at a restaurant. You never mentioned that." "Oh yes," Jade said calmly, accepting the wine glass from Patricia's trembling hand. "The Silver Spoon. It's an excellent place to work. Most of the customers are quite lovely." The emphasis on most was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia sank into her favorite armchair, feeling lightheaded. Her worst fear was confirmed, and now she was trapped in her own home with the evidence of her prejudice sitting on her Italian leather sofa, holding her son's hand. The evening stretched before her like an endless minefield, and dinner hadn't even been served yet. The morning after the disastrous dinner, Michael sat in his childhood bedroom, staring at his phone. He'd noticed the strange undercurrent between his mother and Jade last night, but couldn't quite piece it together. His mother had barely touched her food, something unheard of when their chef prepared her favorite salmon dish. And Jade, usually so warm and open, had maintained a polite but distant demeanor all evening. A gentle knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, expecting his mother. Instead, their housekeeper entered with fresh towels. "Your friend seems lovely," she said kindly, setting down the linens. "Very different from the usual young ladies your mother invites over." She hesitated, then added, "Though I couldn't help but notice Mrs. Wellington seemed a bit off last night." Michael ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You noticed that too? I can't figure out what happened. Mom's usually so, well, at least superficially welcoming to everyone." His phone buzzed with a message from Jade. "Can we meet for coffee? There's something I need to tell you." 20 minutes later, Michael found himself at a small cafe several blocks from the hospital where Jade did her clinical rotations. She was already there, still in her scrubs from her morning rounds, looking tired but determined. "Hey," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Everything okay? You seemed different last night." Jade wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. "There's something you need to know about your mother and me. We've met before." Michael's confusion must have shown on his face because Jade continued, 2 weeks ago, she came to the Silver Spoon with some friends. I was her server." "Okay," Michael said slowly, not seeing the problem. "That's quite a coincidence, but—" "She treated me horribly," Jade cut in, her voice quiet but firm. "Made comments about declining standards, criticized everything I did, and left no tip on a $400 bill. But it wasn't just that. It was the way she looked through me, like I wasn't even human." Michael felt his stomach drop. He'd seen his mother's occasional snobbery before, but this was different. "Are you sure it was her? Maybe it was someone who looked similar." "It was her," Jade said firmly. "I remember every customer who treats me that way, not because I want to hold a grudge, but because it reminds me why I'm working so hard to become a doctor. To prove people like that wrong." Michael slumped back in his chair, memories flooding back. The subtle comments his mother had made over the years about certain people. The way she'd react when he befriended kids from different backgrounds at school. He always chalked it up to her privileged upbringing, made excuses for her behavior. "I'm so sorry," he said finally, reaching for Jade's hand. "You didn't deserve that. No one does." "I don't want an apology from you," Jade said, squeezing his hand. "You're not responsible for your mother's actions. I needed you to know. Because if we're going to be together, this won't be the last time we face something like this." Michael nodded slowly, his jaw set. "I need to talk to her about this. It's not okay." "Just be careful how you approach it," Jade advised. "This isn't about making her feel guilty or defensive. It's about helping her understand why her actions hurt people." As they sat there, hands clasped across the table, Michael's phone kept lighting up with messages from his mother, asking about lunch plans, suggesting potential dinner dates with daughters of her friends, clearly trying to pretend last night never happened. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the remarkable woman in front of him who'd chosen honesty over comfort, who was willing to have this difficult conversation despite the risk. In that moment, he fell even more in love with her strength and grace under pressure. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "Together." Jade smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I know we will. But Michael, your mother's going to have to want to change. We can't force her to see people, differently. That has to come from her." That evening, the Wellington mansion felt colder than usual, despite the warm spring weather outside. Patricia sat in her private sitting room, flipping through a society magazine without really seeing the pages. She'd spent the day trying to arrange lunch dates for Michael with more suitable young women, but he hadn't responded to any of her messages. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house, followed by familiar footsteps. Michael appeared in the doorway, his face set in a way that reminded Patricia of his father during difficult business negotiations. "We need to talk, Mom," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. Patricia brightened artificially. "Of course, darling. I was just thinking about calling Andersons. Their daughter just finished law school at Yale, and—" "Stop!" Michael's voice was firm. "I know what happened at the Silver Spoon 2 weeks ago." The magazine slipped from Patricia's fingers, landing with a soft thud on the Persian carpet. I don't know what you mean." "Really, Mom? You don't remember having lunch there? You don't remember treating your server, treating Jade, like she was beneath you? Making snide comments and leaving no tip on a huge bill?" Patricia's face flushed. "You weren't there. You don't understand the situation. The service was perfect. Michael cut in. Knowing Jade, it was perfect. Just like everything else she does. But you couldn't see past your own prejudices to notice. Prejudices? Patricia stood up, indignant. How dare you suggest? How dare I? How dare you, Mom? Do you know what Jade does besides working at that restaurant? She volunteers at the Children's Hospital. She's top of her class in medical school. She's going to save children's lives someday. But all you saw was someone you thought you could look down on. Patricia sank back into her chair, her perfectly maintained facade cracking. I didn't know. That's the point, Mom. You didn't try to know. You just judged. And you know what's really sad? Jade hasn't said one bad word about you. Even after how you treated her, she told me to be gentle when I talked to you about this. That's the kind of person she is. Tears threatened to spill from Patricia's eyes, ruining her expensive mascara. I was raised. Things were different. That's not an excuse anymore, Michael said, his voice softening slightly. You're not just hurting others with this behavior. You're hurting yourself. You're missing out on knowing amazing people because you're stuck in these outdated, harmful ways of thinking. He pulled out his phone and pulled up a photo. Look at this. This is Jade at the Children's Hospital last week. The photo showed Jade in her white coat, sitting on the floor playing cards with a young patient, both of them laughing. This is who she really is, Mom. Not just your server, not just my girlfriend, but a compassionate, brilliant person who makes the world better. Patricia stared at the photo, her carefully constructed worldview beginning to crack. She does have a lovely smile, she admitted softly. She does, Michael agreed. And you know what else? She was willing to give you another chance last night, despite how you treated her. That's more than many people would do. I don't know how to fix this, Patricia whispered, finally letting her guard down completely. Start by being honest with yourself about your prejudices, Michael said. Then work on changing them. Not just for me or for Jade, but for yourself. Because, Mom, if you don't, you're going to lose a lot more than just your relationship with your future daughter-in-law. The word daughter-in-law hung in the air between them. Patricia looked up sharply, but Michael's expression told her everything she needed to know about his intentions with Jade. I'll try, she said finally, her voice small but sincere. I don't want to lose you. Good, Michael said, standing up. Because Jade and I are having dinner tomorrow at that little Italian place near the hospital. There's room for 3 if someone wants to start making amends. He left his mother sitting there, mascara finally running down her cheeks as she faced the reality of how close she'd come to letting her prejudices destroy her relationship with her only son. The next morning, Patricia sat alone at her usual table in the Boston Ladies' Social Club, her untouched tea growing cold. Around her, the usual chatter of society women filled the air, but today, it all sounded different to her ears. Did you see who they let join the tennis club? One woman whispered nearby. Standards really aren't what they used to be. Patricia flinched, hearing her own words from the silver spoon echoed back at her. She watched as the staff, mostly people of color, moved efficiently through the room, serving women who barely acknowledged their existence. Had she been this blind her entire life? Her friend Helen approached the table, designer handbag swinging. Patricia, darling, you look terrible. Is everything all right? For the first time in their 30-year friendship, Patricia really looked at Helen, at the way she snapped her fingers at a passing server, at her dismissive tone. Was this how she looked to others? I'm fine, Patricia said quietly. Just thinking. About Michael's new friend. Helen sat down uninvited, lowering her voice. Everyone's talking about it. I can recommend an excellent dating service that only works with the right sort off. Stop. Patricia's voice was firm, surprising them both. Jade is a medical student at Harvard. She's brilliant, kind, and my son loves her. That makes her the right sort. Helen's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up. But surely you can't be serious. What will people say? I don't care anymore, Patricia realized, speaking the words aloud for the first time in her life. I almost lost my son because I was worried about what people would say. She stood up, gathering her belongings. I need to go. I have an apology to make. Patricia, Helen called after her. What's gotten into you? But Patricia was already walking out, her heels clicking purposefully across the marble floor. She passed the coat check attendant, a young woman she'd never really looked at before, and noticed her name tag. Amy, medical student. You're in medical school? Patricia asked, stopping suddenly. The young woman straightened, surprised at being addressed directly. Yes, ma'am. Second year at Boston University. This job helps with the bills. Just like Jade, Patricia thought. How many other stories had she missed by not bothering to look? How many times had she been the villain in someone else's day? In her car, Patricia pulled out her phone and, for the first time in her life, searched for articles about unconscious bias and privilege. The results made for uncomfortable reading, but she forced herself to continue. Each word felt like a mirror being held up to her behavior. She thought about the family photos on her mantle, generations of wealthy, white faces staring back at her. What kind of legacy did she want to leave? Did she want to be remembered as the mother who chose social status over her son's happiness? Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Dinner reservation at 7. Coming. Patricia took a deep breath and typed back. Yes, and Michael. I've been doing some reading. I have a lot to learn. His response came quickly. That's all anyone can ask, Mom. She drove home slowly, really seeing her city for the first time. The diverse faces on the streets, the mix of languages in shop windows, the vibrant life that existed outside her carefully curated social bubble. At a stoplight, she watched a young woman in scrubs, probably another medical student, hurrying toward the hospital. In her driveway, Patricia caught her reflection in the car window. She looked exactly the same as she had yesterday, but something fundamental had shifted inside her. Tonight wouldn't be easy. Facing Jade would mean facing her own prejudices head-on. But for the first time in her life, she was ready to do the hard work of changing. She pulled out her phone one more time, opening the website for the Museum of Fine Arts where she served on the board. Their leadership page showed a sea of faces that looked just like hers. Maybe it was time to bring up the topic of diversity at the next board meeting. After all, change had to start somewhere. The silver spoon looked different to Patricia as she pushed open the heavy door at precisely 11:30 a.m., when she knew Jade would be starting her lunch shift. The familiar clink of silverware and soft music felt almost foreign now, knowing she was here not as a privileged customer, but as someone seeking forgiveness. She spotted Jade immediately, efficiently setting up her section for the lunch rush. Taking a deep breath, Patricia walked over, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. Jade? Her voice came out softer than intended. Do you have a moment? Jade turned, surprise flickering across her face before her professional mask slipped into place. Mrs. Wellington. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Please, Patricia said, clutching her designer bag like a shield. Could we talk? Just for a few minutes. Ming, who was nearby rolling silverware, caught Jade's eye and nodded, silently offering to cover her section. Jade led Patricia to a quiet corner booth, standing rather than sitting, maintaining the server-customer dynamic out of habit. Please, sit with me, Patricia said, sliding into the booth. After a moment's hesitation, Jade sat down across from her. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Patricia began, her carefully prepared speech deserting her. Actually, no. First, I need to say I'm sorry. Not just for how I treated you here that day, but for everything. My behavior was inexcusable. Jade's expression remained neutral, but she didn't interrupt. Yesterday, I was at my social club, Patricia continued, and I really looked around for the first time. I saw how people like me treat people we consider beneath us. She winced at her own words. I saw myself in them, and I didn't like what I saw. What made you come to this realization now? Jade asked quietly. Honestly, the thought of losing my son. But it's become more than that. Patricia pulled out her phone, showing Jade her recent search history. Articles about privilege, unconscious bias, systemic racism. I'm learning. I know it's late in life to start, but it's never too late to learn, Jade said, her professional mask softening slightly. But Mrs. Wellington, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about me or about Michael. This is about seeing every person as human, regardless of their job or their background. I know, Patricia nodded, tears threatening to spill. Today, I learned that my coat check attendant is a medical student too. I've seen her hundreds of times and never once thought about her life, her dreams. I've been so blind. A customer waved from across the restaurant, and Jade glanced over apologetically. I need to get back to work. Of course, Patricia said quickly, then reached into her bag. But first, she pulled out an envelope. This is for that day. The tip I should have left, with interest, and a letter. You don't have to read it now, or ever if you don't want to. Jade took the envelope carefully. Mrs. Wellington, this isn't about the money. I know. But it's part of making things right. And Patricia hesitated, then continued, I'd like to make a regular donation to the hospital's scholarship fund for minority medical students. Not to ease my conscience, but because it's the right thing to do. For the first time, a genuine smile crossed Jade's face. That would help a lot of students who are working jobs like this to make their dreams happen. Patricia stood up, smoothing her skirt. Jade, thank you for giving me a chance to apologize, and for loving my son enough to help him see what I couldn't. Michael sees me for who I am, Jade said simply. That's all anyone can ask for. As Patricia walked toward the exit, she heard Jade call after her. Mrs. Wellington, will you be joining us for dinner tonight? Patricia turned back. If you're comfortable with that, I'd like to. 7 o'clock, Jade said with a small nod. Don't be late. And Mrs. Wellington, thank you for coming here today. It means a lot. Walking to her car, Patricia felt lighter somehow. She knew this was just the beginning, that one apology didn't erase years of prejudice, but it was a start. Her phone buzzed with a message from Helen asking about her strange behavior at the club. Patricia deleted it without responding. She had more important things to focus on now. 1 month had passed since Patricia's apology at the Silver Spoon. The hospital corridor buzzed with activity as she walked through, carrying a carefully packed lunch bag. She'd made this trip several times now, finding her way to the pediatric wing where Jade was doing her rotation. Today was different, though. Patricia had received an unexpected text from Jade that morning. Big case today. Could use some support during lunch break. She found Jade in the doctor's lounge, still in her scrubs, looking exhausted. A young resident nodded respectfully as Patricia entered. She'd become a familiar face here over the past few weeks. I brought your favorite, Patricia said, pulling out containers of homemade soup and fresh bread. The chef insisted on making it himself once I told him it was for you. Jade managed a tired smile. Thank you. I've been in surgery prep all morning. Do you want to talk about it? Patricia asked, setting out their lunch. It's a 6-year-old girl, Jade said softly. Complex heart condition. I'm assisting Dr. Chen with the surgery this afternoon. She paused, stirring her soup. Her parents work 3 jobs between them to afford the treatment. Patricia nodded, remembering similar stories Jade had shared. These conversations had opened her eyes to a world she'd never truly seen before. Actually, Jade continued, that's partly why I asked you to come today. Remember that scholarship fund you started? Of course. Patricia had worked with the hospital board to establish a fund for underprivileged medical students, starting with a substantial personal donation. Well, one of our cleaning staff here. Her daughter just got accepted to medical school. She's brilliant, but was going to turn it down because of the cost. I told her about the scholarship. Patricia felt warmth spread through her chest. That's wonderful. Please, put me in touch with the family. I'd love to help with the application process. Jade smiled, more genuinely this time. You've really changed, you know that? I'm trying, Patricia admitted. Though I still catch myself sometimes, making assumptions. Old habits. But you catch yourself. That's what matters. Jade checked her watch. I should get back soon. The surgery's scheduled for 2. Wait. Patricia reached into her bag again. I brought something else. She pulled out a small box. I know you can't wear it during surgery, but... Jade opened the box to find a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant. It's beautiful, but... It was my grandmother's, Patricia explained. She was one of the first female doctors in Boston. I found it while going through some old things, and... She hesitated. I thought you should have it. She would have been proud to see another strong woman following her path. Tears welled in Jade's eyes. Mrs. Wellington, Patricia, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me something. Patricia took Jade's hand. When you're a brilliant surgeon, remember there are other young women out there like you, fighting to make their dreams happen. Help them like you helped me see the truth. Just then, Michael appeared in the doorway. Mom? Jade? Everything okay? Everything's fine, Jade said, quickly wiping her eyes. Your mom was just being family. Michael's face lit up at that word. He'd watched over the past month as his mother had slowly but surely worked to change, attending diversity seminars at the hospital, revising the museum's hiring policies, even standing up to her social club friends when they made discriminatory comments. Speaking of family, he said, dinner at our place this Sunday. We have some news to share. Patricia caught the meaningful look that passed between them, noticed the way Jade's hand briefly touched her stomach. Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure. I'll be there, she said warmly. And Jade, good luck with the surgery. That little girl is lucky to have you on her team. As Patricia walked back to her car, she passed the hospital's cleaning staff member Jade had mentioned, the one whose daughter dreamed of being a doctor. Instead of looking past her, as she once would have, Patricia stopped. Excuse me, she said kindly. I heard your daughter got into medical school. I'd love to hear more about her dreams. 6 months later, the Wellington Mansion's grand ballroom sparkled with lights and laughter. Michael and Jade's engagement party was in full swing, but it wasn't the typical high society affair everyone had expected. The guest list was a beautiful mix of people from all walks of life. Doctors in designer suits mingled with restaurant servers in their best outfits. Hospital staff chatted with museum board members, and medical students shared stories with society matrons. Patricia stood at the podium, preparing to give her speech. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked out at the crowd, so different from her usual social circle, yet somehow feeling more real than any event she'd ever hosted. When Michael first told me about Jade, she began, her voice clear and strong, I made a terrible mistake. I let my prejudices blind me to what was right in front of me. An extraordinary woman who would not only make my son happy, but would change my life for the better. She paused, finding Jade's eyes in the crowd. Many of you know I first met Jade at the Silver Spoon restaurant, where she worked to support herself through medical school. What you don't know is that I treated her horribly that day. I was everything that was wrong with privilege and prejudice. Ming, who was standing near Jade, squeezed her friend's hand supportively. But life has a funny way of teaching us lessons, Patricia continued. Through Jade, I learned to see beyond the surface, beyond the assumptions I'd carried my whole life. She showed me, through her grace and forgiveness, what true character looks like. Patricia gestured to the diverse crowd. Look around this room. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have imagined hosting a party like this. Now, I can't imagine it any other way. Because every person here has a story, has dreams, has value. It took my future daughter-in-law to help me see that. She turned to face Michael and Jade directly. Michael, you chose well. Not because Jade is about to become a brilliant surgeon, though she is. Not because she comes from a good family, though she does. But because she has the strength to stand up for what's right, the grace to forgive, and the wisdom to help others learn and grow. Tears glistened in Jade's eyes as Patricia continued. Jade, you're not just marrying my son. You've become the daughter I never had. You've taught me more about love, acceptance, and growth than I learned in all my years in society. Patricia raised her glass. But my journey isn't over. Just last week, I resigned from the social club that I once thought was so important. Instead, I'm focusing my energy on the scholarship foundation we've established for underprivileged medical students. Because change isn't just about words, it's about actions. She smiled at Amy, her former coat check attendant, now a recipient of the foundation's first scholarship. To Michael and Jade, thank you for showing us that love knows no boundaries, that change is possible at any age, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come in packages we least expect. The room erupted in applause, but Patricia wasn't finished. And to everyone here tonight, whether you serve meals, save lives, clean floors, or sit on boards, thank you for being part of this journey. You've shown me what real community looks like. After the speech, Patricia found herself surrounded by people wanting to share their stories. She listened, really listened, to each one, something her old self would never have done. Across the room, she caught Jade's eye. Her future daughter-in-law mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Later that evening, as the party wound down, Patricia overheard one of her old society friends say, "She's certainly changed." And for the first time in her life, Patricia Wellington felt proud not of her social status or her wealth, but of her growth as a human being. She watched as Jade danced with Michael, their love evident in every movement, and knew that sometimes the greatest prejudice to overcome is the one we hold within ourselves.